Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Back with another Sweet 16 game preview here. We got number 2 seed Houston, number 3 seed Illinois. This game being played in Houston's backyard. Should be a really entertaining game. Houston, of course, probably going to have the home crowd, the majority of the fans, but Illinois will certainly travel well here. This game, 10:05 p.m. tip. Cody, we'll start on the Illinois side of things. What do they need to do here to pick up a win and move on to the Elite Eight?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're at a little bit of a disadvantage to start it with. Houston's played in this arena multiple times. I mean, they have players on this roster that have played here probably 7 or 8 times in their career, so they're comfortable here, and it's going to make it really tough. But Illinois fans do travel well, so don't be shocked if it's not like a crazy differential in fan support. But I'll start on the offensive end with Illinois, and it's mostly shot volume with them is kind of what could hold them back in this game, and particularly with taking care of the basketball, even though they are very good at it. I think they can get on the glass versus like a defense that's in rotation very often in Houston. But I do prefer more like passive schemes against Illinois. So, Wagler and Boswell can kind of create getting downhill, and then they still have the pop man in the Avicic twins or Mirkovic to knock down that pick and pop three. But I view this Illinois offense as pretty matchup proof overall. That they just have a lot of counters for things that you're trying to do. But for the ball security stuff, like they're 9th in the country in turnover rate, but they did play in the Big Ten, which is a point I know you brought up with I believe it was Wisconsin when they played High Point. That didn't really come back to bite them in that game by any means, but the Big Ten, there's a lot of defenses that play like very passively and don't really like to force a ton of turnovers. In Houston, that's kind of what they do best, even though this defense is like a step behind what it's been the past few years. But you can bother these the Illinois bigs. Like they're gonna trap or monster the post is what they like to call it. They actually haven't been great when the defense commits to the post, and they can potentially force these bigs into making some poor decisions, and Houston can get out and run. So Illinois is going to need to take care of the ball. But if they are able to take care of the ball, I think, the short roll ability and just overall catch and shoot ability of Illinois is going to be, is going to make it really tough on this Houston defense. I think they can really make them pay when they're playing in rotation. And like I said, they can get on the offensive glass as well without having to pay in transition, because Houston doesn't really look to run a ton, which is a matchup angle I've kind of been looking at with Illinois throughout the entire season. So I like the matchup for Illinois as long as they take care of the basketball. Defensively, it's not terrible, but containing the dribble creation of Flemings is really the number one thing. Illinois, they just don't really have the flexibility to get out of their drop coverage, really, especially like when they're playing man. Like Illinois will, they will switch it up and play a zone, but that will be tough in this matchup against Sharp and Uzan off the ball as shooters. Then a guy like McCarty too, who can really knock it down. But Illinois, they can keep Houston off the glass because they're not playing in rotation all that much. They can keep a big attached to a big. But yeah, really on the defensive end, really all it comes down to is containing Flemings. You can't let him, get to the mid range super comfortably all the time, or at least just limit his attempts at the rim. Don't let him get to the free throw line at all. It really comes down to how they guard him. Boswell's going to have to be really good fighting over those screens, staying connected to him at all times here. Because if they can't, it's going to open up some other things like Sharp knocking down shots off the ball, Uzan as well. So Sanak picking pop threes. If he's hitting threes, it's going to make it tough on this Illinois defense. But overall, like not a terrible two-way matchup.
Yeah, it isn't a bad matchup for Illinois. It's really kind of interesting, right? Because they're able to kind of negate some of the things that Houston does very well on the defensive end, as long as they're able to take care of the ball, like you alluded to. So I'll start there on the defensive end for Houston. It's really got to be important to force turnovers, make Wagler, make Boswell uncomfortable, not allow for like easy passes out of the ball screen, which I know that Houston does a good job of. They're going to hound you, but it can't be like direct line, straight line pass out of it. Potentially for like a three for Mirkovic or for Tomislav Ivicic, but also hitting the short roll, and then they're able to spray to the plethora of guys that can knock it down for them. That would be really not a good setup, because at that point I think they'd be preying on Houston hopefully missing, or not Houston, Illinois hopefully missing shots, and then needing to secure rebounds against a team that does a great job on the glass. So they need to be able to limit the glass. That's going to be really important. And then as always, I bring this up with Houston, whether they're playing a team that draws fouls at a high rate or not, like they need to defend without fouling. It's always coming up because of their aggressive nature. It's not even necessarily always shooting fouls. It's just being overly aggressive in the midcourt. So just limiting those. They need their guys on the floor, particularly for the offensive end. They can't go long stretches without like Flemings like they did. At times late in the Big 12 season against Arizona the second time, or in the Big 12 tournament. So they got to limit their fouling without a doubt. Then on the offensive end, I think just trying to generate as many tap outs as possible. I know that Kelvin Sampson, I think, aims for 15 a game, which is, it's crazy, but that's his goal. And they do a great job of it. I know their offensive rebounding numbers have been down, but they still, they dominated the offensive glass the other night against Texas A&M. Obviously, like that's a matchup thing. Illinois is much better on the defensive glass, but still, if they can offensive rebound with that intensity that they had, they're going to be in a decent spot here. I don't hate the setup for Flemings against the ball screen action. They're more than happy to live in the mid range, and he's shown to be able to knock that down. So I think like for a guy like Flemings against the drop coverage, shots are going to be there. We saw at times for a guy like not Trey Donaldson, who I'm drawing a blank. For VCU,
Terrence Hill.
Yeah. He got some clean looks. They weren't really making shots the other night, but he got some clean looks. I think that opportunities are going to be there for Flemings, and I trust him to make shots. Uzan got going a little bit the other night, so potentially him as well. I think one thing they could also utilize is some like guard to guard ghost screen type actions. We saw with VCU doing that at times, and they kind of got caught in like miscommunication in like, I don't even know what to call it, but Wagler just kind of was standing still for a couple times, and VCU generated two pretty good open catch and shoot threes. I think that's a guy like Sharp that could definitely do that, utilize some guard to guard ball screens. And then I think it's really important to have good spacing against this team. Try and space them out. VCU at times really like brought all their guys into one area, and spacing was jacked up. So even when they ran a ball screen, potentially had an advantage, like guys were able to help the helper way too easily. So spacing is going to be important here. But Cody, shifting gears, game pick here. Who are you going with and why?
Yeah, honestly, I've had a tough time with this one because I do think Houston can turn over Illinois a little bit more often than Illinois' numbers say. But if Illinois navigates the aggressive defense, I think they can have success. And you make a really good point about Illinois forces shots in the mid range. Houston doesn't care to shoot anywhere besides the mid range. Like they don't need the rim to score, and they're not like a high volume catch and shoot offense, which Illinois does a pretty good job of taking away as well. So they're going to be able to just operate in the offense that they normally run against anybody. So it is tough. And, playing in Houston might ultimately be the deciding factor, but I'm going to take Illinois to get it done. I think they can generate some second chances without, or just crash the offensive glass in general without, getting it. It's not going to really bother them in transition necessarily. Houston is looking to play a little bit slower. So I'm going to take Illinois to get it done. I don't really feel good about it, having to play in the Toyota Center, but I'll take them for the sake of actually just making a pick. I honestly have had a tough time with this one.
Yeah, I'm on the other side here. I've been a Houston homer for a while. I'm going to pick them here. I think they do enough. I think Flemings is going to get enough of the shots that he wants to take. And despite Illinois being a good defensive rebounding team, I think from what I saw the other night, from Houston's offensive rebounding attack, less about the matchup and more just about the way they were attacking the offensive glass. I think they can still have success here against Illinois. So I'm going to take them to get the job done. But anyway, we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.